Good afternoon. My name is Travis Escobar with Millennial Rhode Island, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for our first virtual town hall with Rhode Island Senior Senator Jack Reed. Senator Reed was first elected in his seat in 1996. He also served as a U.S. House Representative in Rhode Island's 2nd District from 1991 to 1997. Senator Reed is a member of the Committee of Armed Services as a ranking member, Committee on Appropriations, and the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Senator Reed is quite frankly one of the most influential and respected elected officials in our country today, having admiration from both sides of the political spectrum. Today, we're using this forum to ask Senator Reed questions around top issues that are impacting our country and impacting our generation. And while we will only have an hour to have this sort of conversation, we hope for it to be in-depth and include many important issues that face us today. And to further explain our format, I'd like to bring on Chris Parisi, President of Trailblaze PVD and a board member of Millennial Rhode Island.
Great. Thank you, Travis, and welcome viewers to our virtual town hall with Senator Jack Reed. This is a great one. We're getting to ask questions directly to our senator. So here's the format if you're new to this. Whether you're watching it on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, fill out in the comment section any question that you have. And then we'll put it up on screen. We'll ask the senator, and we'll get to have that type of virtual town hall feel. So again, ask any questions. It will be most likely towards the second half of the program where we'll share your question on the screen, and we'll ask the senator. So this is an engaging conversation, so be sure to ask any questions you have, and we look forward to chatting with you, our viewers, as well as Senator Jack Reed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Jack Reed, for joining us today for this conversation. The first topic we wanted to sort of get out of the way and sort of like an update is what should Rhode Island expect in the next stimulus package? We know that it's held up in Congress, and there's many people looking and business owners that are looking for potential support. So yeah, please let us know what should Rhode Island expect in the next stimulus package if the next stimulus package does happen.
Well, first, let me thank you, Travis and Chris, and all of the Millennial group. It's a pleasure to be here. And with respect to the COVID package, which we desperately need, it is a function of one of the most remarkable times in our history. We have a major pandemic, a health crisis of the first order, which has triggered an economic crisis, which is also surfacing a racial justice crisis, which has always been within the fabric of our country, regrettably. And then there's an existential environmental crisis, a climate crisis, which is being demonstrated graphically in the West Coast today. So we're in the midst of a series of crises, and we have to respond. And the response should be a major COVID package, one that deals with the whole range, that is not, as the Republicans sent to us last week, a skinny COVID package. We may need a robust COVID package. What do we have to do? Well, we have a whole host of tasks. We need to help business, particularly small business. And one of the bills that was not put in the Republican package, which was very frustrating to us because it was bipartisan, was a restaurant bill that would help restaurants and bars. We have a bill that's going to help the public stages because most of our theatrical enterprises cannot function. We also need to help tourism companies. Our intercity bus services are down dramatically. Our entertainment venues, hotels, et cetera. And none of that was put in the package. So we need that. But we also have to make sure that people are getting by, that families can endure this very difficult and challenging. So we need the safety net. We need support for those people who aren't working. And again, they offered a meager unemployment compensation benefit, not adequate enough to the challenges that most families face. We need housing support. We have a housing crisis already. We had one before. It's going to get worse. It's building up. There are administrative restrictions on eviction and foreclosures, but at some point they'll go and the dam will break. So we have to do something now. I believe that now. We're going to get food on the table, so we have to have food programs and make sure it's available to people. So it's a whole host of different issues. But once again, because this is a health crisis at the beginning, we have to make sure that our health programs are solid. We have to provide support for our physicians, our first responders, our hospitals, our nursing homes. We have to provide resources. And then another big issue, which I think is very important, is the issue of support to the states. The states are sort of the key actors in this whole process. They are the ones who sort of on the front lines, and they need the resources. Back in the CARES Act, I said we needed $750 billion for the states. Well, we got $150 billion, and I was involved in negotiations. And we got a minimum for each state, so Rhode Island got a $1.25 billion minimum. Those funds are available. They've been used. They're the ones that are trying to tide over some very difficult situations. But we still need much, much more. The states have to be able to step up. They're the ones who will lead the effort in terms of schools, getting children back into schools, keeping the schools safe, daycare, and without schools and daycare, people can't go to work. So those are issues that will be state-oriented. So we have to have a significant program of state resources. Now, and the other thing we have to do is ensure that this crisis, this generation, the millennial generation, is not overwhelmed by debt. Overwhelmed by debt because of student loans, overwhelmed by debt because of mortgage payments that can't be paid now and then accrue. And so that's another reason why we have to step in very dramatically with support for our education program, much more so than we have in the past. And in fact, we should have done that anyway, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to let people go into the world for their first job with this huge debt. They should be, as much as possible, debt free. And of course, the mortgage payments are something that, and other payments like that, we can't let this generation be overwhelmed in debt. So it's not really clear if the Republicans want to have a bill. I think basically they put something up last week simply to say they did it. It is a political gesture, not a substantive policy. But I'll remind you, the CARES Act last spring, which was a major piece of legislation, which has been carrying us so far, we had to vote against it twice, prevent it from coming to the floor twice before they finally decided to agree. Well, this is about the last week because of our timing. And I hope that based on what they've heard from going back home, what they've heard from talking to people who are concerned, as we are all concerned, that they're ready now to sit down and to deal. And we can, I think, get a bill through. But it's really up to them whether they choose to pick it up or not. My hope is that they do. And obviously, I'm urging my colleagues to do that. That's a sense of, I think, where we are at the moment. And at this point, I'd be very happy to just ask Travis if he wants to begin the questioning.
Thank you so much, Senator, for that update. And yeah, so next we're going to go through a list of questions that were created with Millennial Rhode Island and a couple of folks that heard about the event. And one of the questions that we have is, given the countless loss of Black lives due to police brutality, such as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, what should Congress do to support the Black Lives Matter movement and address systematic racism in our country?
Well, first, not just Congress, but everyone has to listen and has to pay attention and has to recognize that this is an existential problem with the United States, that this has been in the fabric of our country since the beginning. And it's caused us incredible hardships. We fought a civil war about it. I was a youngster during the civil rights movement where brave and courageous people like Dr. King stood up and led us forward. And actually, we moved forward. We enacted legislation that made an improvement, but not enough. It's not enough. And I think the approach can't be just legislative, but there are some legislative issues that we can deal with. For example, in the wake of what's been happening, I've co-sponsored legislation that would require any police officer in riot control to have a name tag. You've got to be able to know. You can't hide behind anonymity. You've got to be able to know. And that's one thing I think we can do. We've written, and I've joined my colleagues in writing to the Attorney General and Department of Defense, Secretary Esper, can you justify the use of military force the way you did? I think it was a very dangerous precedent when we were using National Guard troops and one or two helicopters to basically disrupt a crowd of peaceful people demonstrating so the president could stroll over to the church. I think that was wrong. I must commend the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, who gave a strong speech saying that the Insurrection Act, that's the legal justification, should not be used in that case. So I think we've struck some chords, but what we have to do is keep up the pressure, the peaceful pressure, the demonstrations. And then we have to think about constructive aspects. One of the greatest things I think we've been able to do over the last several years for low-income people is the Affordable Care Act. That was President Obama's initiative that actually expanded coverage. In Rhode Island, we have about 97% of our children covered by health care. And if you have health care as a child, you have a much, much better chance of growing up into a productive citizen. In fact, I'll tell you the other side of the coin. If you don't have good health care, then there's lots of chances that by the time you get into even grammar school, you could have medical problems that were overwhelming and they haven't been treated. So that's something we have to do. We have to expand it more. We have to have health care so that it reaches everyone. We've got to fix our schools too. Education is still, I think, the greatest element in terms of driving forward in terms of both individual and collectively our country. That means simple things. Go in and repair schools. I'm sponsoring legislation that would provide significant federal money to go in and just rehabilitate schools. So they're modern, they're up to date, they're clean, they're healthy, and children for it. Then we have to have programmatic changes too. We have to use this COVID experience to see what we can do with remote education, not just during the COVID crisis, but afterwards. Maybe there are elements that are better done by remote education. Then I think also too, we have to ensure that we have this coverage and care for children. I think if we build strong children, you'll get strong, productive adults, and that's the key. And I think we have to do that. And the focus has to be specifically on groups, racial groups that have been disadvantaged. We know who they are, and we have to make sure that we provide additional resources for those groups, not just lump it into some type of educational reform, but be specific. So those are the things I think we have to do.
Yeah. Well said, Senator. We definitely have to look at our institutions in order to address the systemic racism, and we certainly agree with that. I want to go back a little bit towards your update on the stimulus package. You did mention the $1.25 billion minimum for the states that you fought for, that Rhode Island and many other states certainly needed. What was the original thought plan on how the states would use that money, and were they able to use it for things like addressing budget deficits?
Well, I'll tell you what my thoughts were, because I've been in a constant fight with Secretary Mnuchin about this since we were negotiating all the way through its adoption. My thoughts the states should have, because at that point, the only functional institutions were really the governor's offices. Most assemblies could not meet because of the virus. That the governors should have rather significant and broad latitude, including making up for lost revenue. Mnuchin and his folks said, no, they can't make up for lost revenue. I think that's a mistake, because I think, again, if the governor has a better sense of what the priorities, he or she understands what needs to be done in that state. South Dakota is a lot different than Rhode Island. They might not need a certain program. Most states have counties. Rhode Island doesn't have any counties. So, we don't have to provide any support for our county sheriffs or our county anything else, but we have other needs that other states don't have. So my thought was it would be very, very broad. And what Secretary Mnuchin essentially did was, and I still argue with him in terms of the language, interpreted it to mean no revenue replacement. So it's just for new COVID-related activities. And we're going to try, in the HEROES Act in last May, the House put in language that would open it up significantly so that it would be very, very broad. In fact, what I'm proposing right now is an additional $600 billion, which would have wide open both revenue replacement and other programmatic initiatives. And let me just, one last point, which I think is interesting. If states can't go ahead and replace revenue, they have certain functions they have to perform. And if they don't have the money, they're going to get it. And that means they're going to have to raise taxes. And ironically, one of the major sources of any income tax is businesses. So if we don't do it this way, by giving them flexibility, I think we'll end up punishing small business particularly. And I don't think that's right.
Agreed. Well said. And the states definitely need it. They're the ones on the front lines. And it's definitely a smart way to, because every state's different, as you mentioned. But every state is also not getting negatively affected by climate change like others. For instance, on the West Coast, we, as you alluded to earlier, we're seeing the leading or most recent example of the impact climate change can have. Now, a lot of young people have been calling for what they're called the Green New Deal, right? And we wanted to know, what are your thoughts? Do you approve or the Green New Deal, or do you have any other suggestions on how we can quickly eradicate and fight the climate change that exists today?
Well, I think the Green New Deal is a positive direction, very positive direction. We cannot continue to do what we're doing. You can just look around. You've got fires that are raging throughout the West Coast. You have a hurricane off the coast of Louisiana. We just had one 2 weeks ago, and it's building up. And one of the reasons is because the water in the Gulf is warmer than it has been in the past, and therefore much more susceptible to hurricane. Everywhere you turn, you're looking at climate effects. We've got to fix this. And a Green New Deal, we're talking about going to alternate energies, making progress in that regard is, I think, very, very important. Senator Whitehouse, my colleague, is very, very influential in this area and deserves a great deal of credit. But I've also been working for a while on some of these issues. But for example, we're very proud of our offshore winds off Block Island. One of the reasons we got it done is that the CRMC came to me and asked me for resources. Back in the days, you could get earmarks for a SAMP, they call it, a Special Area Management Plan. So they actually zoned the whole area several years before the company came in to build. So the fishermen had their opportunity to talk. When it was ready to go, it was ready to go. So we can do things like that to encourage offshore winds, to encourage alternate energy, electric vehicles, setting up a system of charging stations throughout the United States. A public-private partnership would be excellent, because that would give even more incentive to Detroit to start making these vehicles. So I just think it's absolutely essential. And just a final point here. If you want to ask some people who feel strongly about climate change, ask a professional soldier or ask a professional military person. They are overseas in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan. They're seeing climate change. They're seeing drought. They're seeing forces that are creating tension and violence. So this is not just something for nice for the United States and nice for our energy. This is a worldwide phenomenon that we have to deal with.
Thank you, Senator. And climate change we've seen in the recent elections, and just our next election has really riled up a lot of young people to be politically involved, to be activists and advocates, and just sort of that notion of the future of their lives. What is the future that they're going to sort of hold? And a lot of young people, to get a college degree, that is, obtaining, sort of their future, their financial future, right? And Americans today, carry a combined over 1.7 trillion in student loan debt. There's a Twitter account, Student Loan Debt Crisis, that would periodically remind and put out the increase of total, which is just alarming. And Rhode Island, unfortunately, averages in the top 5 in the country with debt. One of the calls we've seen nationally is just to cancel student loan debt. Just get rid of it, throw it away. What do you think about that? And what is your plan to tackle the student loan debt crisis?
Well, first, make a point, the CARES Act actually provided relief in terms of interest, accrual, and repayment and involuntary collections for federally insured loans. But there's a category of loans, the private loans, mostly to parents, and the bank loans, the Perkins loans rather, which are not. And I'd like to see that brought underneath this suspension of interest payments and other payments. Then we have to go ahead and start dealing with the issue of student debt generally, regardless of the COVID crisis. We should have a number of programs. First, we should lower the interest rate down to as low as possible. We should essentially subsidize interest rates. We should do that so that we have the lowest possible debt accumulating with young people. Then we also have to go ahead and provide opportunities to go to school without accruing debt. I think a program of 2 years of national service and 4 years of college would be excellent. And that would be something that would give young people a chance for 2 years to learn some skills, et cetera, and then go into college better prepared. But that was not something I think we should do on a very broad basis. The other thing we've got to do is we've got to increase the Pell Grants. When the Pell Grant was initiated in the 1960s, it covered 80% of the average tuition to a state college. Now it covers 20%. We've just fallen behind in terms of our investment in education. So there's no, in fact, in some respects, there's no reason why children, young people should be this far behind. That's one thing we can do. And the other thing I've been pushing very strenuously is that the institutions have to play their role too. There are some, particularly private for-pay operations that have very, very high default rates. I think their business plan is get as much Pell Grants as they can, but don't teach young people what they need to get a job and pay it back. I propose that at a certain point, they pay the debt along with the federal government, along with the debt holders. And I think that will provide a better incentive for better behavior by some of these schools. So all of those things together we have to do. And it's not just a result of the COVID. This is something we have to do because it's become an incredible drain on young people in the country.
All right. Looks like we're getting a lot of comments on our Facebook. So I know we have a few more Q&As directly from Travis and I, but I'm going to kind of pivot so that we can hear from our audience, if that's all right. So Ben, one of our questions we see from Victor. Victor over here, Victor Regino is saying, hello, thank you for taking the time. Specific question regarding access to capital for small businesses. So there's some loan options for small businesses, but limited as far as who is eligible. How can we come up with a better solution to help the smaller, like the micro businesses that may have 0 to 2 employees?
I think one thing we have to do is target the lending through community-based institutions. There are institutions whose whole purpose is to be in the community, to lend to the community. They're not the big super banks, et cetera. The first PPP, most of that went through the biggest banks in the country, huge conglomerates, and no surprise, it was not a lot of small business people. The second increment of PPP, we directed it that the money be sent to the CDIFs, Community Development Investment Foundations, I believe. So we wanted to get the money closer to people. Now, I think we also have to start thinking about a proactive outreach to small business. Using, in fact, during this crisis, I called up the Rhode Island Foundation and saw if they could go out and start doing some work in terms of reaching out to communities, to small communities. The other factor, too, is that sole proprietorships are seldom recognized in terms of these lending programs. We have to think about these sole proprietorships. That it has to be done, carefully. It's not just giving money away, but you have to be able, I think, to go ahead and make sure it gets down, and it has to be targeted. Once again, when we're talking about Black Lives Matters, we have these programs, but are we sure they're getting into the African American community or the Latino community? We have to make sure they're getting into these communities.
Very well. Thank you, Senator. And we're going to keep with this Q&A since we're getting some great questions here. The next one will be from Kyla Pecchia. She's very disappointed that wasn't able to have the infamous May breakfast, and wants to know how you like to eat your calamari. But her second question is related to what we talked about with debt, and whether there's anything you can share regarding future legislation that would address our collective generational debt. I know you just touched upon this.
Yeah, well, first, I'm sorry that May breakfast wasn't held either. We couldn't even do it virtually, so forgive me for that. Calamari, my story about calamari is pretty simple. As a kid growing up in Rhode Island, every Christmas Eve, my Italian friends had the fishes, and I'd go over and I'd have calamari. It wasn't until I was about 30 that I realized I was eating squid. I thought calamari was calamari. So anyway, that's my calamari story. There's a lot of things we can do. I mentioned some of them, but it's worth repeating. One, we can go ahead and set the rates for lending much lower. So if you have to borrow, you're not borrowing at the current rates, but they're borrowing at the lowest possible. The Federal Reserve is subsidizing large institutions left and right with extremely low borrowing rates for macroeconomic purposes. I don't see why the federal government can't turn around and subsidize the next generation of scholars with low rates. So that's one thing. Two, I mentioned before, we have to increase the Pell Grant, and we propose every year we try to increase it, but we've got to step up and really move it up significantly, and that would help tremendously. Then I think too, in terms of my idea I mentioned about national service is absolutely critical. It will give skills and it will do important things. And we're talking now too about, how do we reconcile this social chasm between communities and races, et cetera. One way is to have trained and dedicated people working in the communities for a period of time, doing counseling, doing social work, doing other types of things. And that would be a way to do it. And then you would get your 4 years of education. So that's something I think that's absolutely critical. Also trying to, as I said, keep some of the more aggressive private schools from using the federal system as really a source of money and not providing good education. So that's something else we have to do too.
Senator, we're going to go to a question from Joe Molina Flynn, if So he's an immigration attorney. He writes, Senator, I am troubled by the fact that we have not done anything meaningful with immigration because it seems like everyone wants too large a bite out of the apple. Why is it that the Senate and House do not start taking up this issues piecemeal, start with the low-hanging fruit and start giving some people some relief? Instead, millions of undocumented persons have been waiting 20 years for another meaningful piece of legislation. Wanted to highlight that question. Just immigration has been an issue that seems to have been kicked the can down the road from multiple Congresses. What can be done, or what is realistically can be done in the near term?
One is that, we reached sort of the zenith, I think, in about 2006 when we passed in the Senate a bipartisan immigration reform bill. One of the leaders was Senator John McCain, but it was a bipartisan effort. Unfortunately, the Republican House wouldn't take it up, but there we set the criteria. I think that's appropriate. We have to have secure borders, yes, of course, but we have to give people an opportunity who've been here for years and worked hard and paid their dues, an opportunity to become citizens. We have to have an open view towards immigrants coming in with talents, particularly from across the globe. What I think has happened is that this is a reaction to the Trump phenomenon. The attack on immigrants from the very beginning of his campaign, the first words almost out of his mouth, the building the wall. We've been fighting for 2 years to try to prevent a waste of huge resources going to build a wall that will not effectively do what we want to be done. I've been down there. I've visited. I tell you, it's very disconcerting to go into a facility and see a cage literally filled with about 10 or 15, 12-year-old boys. That's not a way to grow up. So it's not what we are as a nation. So we've been pushing back on him a lot and trying to get traction. First of all, you would not get any real traction over here in the Senate because I think the Republicans are so concerned and scared, literally, about Trump and immigration that they wouldn't touch it. So there's no action on the Senate side. I think on the House side, you have ideas, but they're not yet ready to bring forth a bill which they know is just going to not even be accepted by the Senate. So that's the dilemma. But the issue of immigration is absolutely critical. Part of the skill sets that we need for our technical, highly technical work, our immigrants have them, and they're valuable to the United States. But then there are people who come here with the same attitude that I'm sure my ancestors did and your ancestors did. They wanted to work hard for a better life for their children. They wanted to give themselves to this country, and they did. And what's one of the ironies to me is so many people I hear who are now anti-immigrant, if you go back about 2 or 3 generations, they were immigrants. That's not fair, And I think we can and we should have legislation. I don't see it's not going to happen this term. We only have weeks left to go. But with the right political combination next January, I think we'll have an immigration coming forward, and we'll try to get it through.
Sure hope so. Thank you, Senator. Yeah, I'm second generation when it comes to Italians on Ellis Island, so I know what you're talking about with that. And one thing I'm very close with is on the small business side. As leading the Rhode Island Small Business Coalition, we've been advocating for our small businesses here in Rhode Island. Now, recently, we've pushed for the governor to use that $1.25 billion that you fought for to allocate towards small businesses, and they did that through the Restore RI grant program. Commerce has done a great job in pushing for that and making it happen, but unfortunately wasn't able to really help all businesses. And the question's not more about the Restore RI grant program. but more about restaurants and other severely impacted industries. As we know here in Rhode Island, restaurants are one of the things that make us who we are, but also an important part of our economic engine. And they're getting completely severely impacted. And once the weather gets a little bit colder, I was just on a weekly coalition call, and they're concerned not only about the revenue drop, but the sales tax is due, the license is due 11/1, and there's not only getting difficulties at the state level, but they're also getting drops in revenue, as well as increases in expenses for PPE, for outdoor dining that they didn't have before. I know that there was the Restaurants Act that was, proposed and discussed, but these restaurant owners and those in the hospitality industry, they're hanging by a thread, Senator. What is anything that can be happening in these next few weeks of the session? And if not, what can we do at the state level to support our restaurants in our Rhode Island economy?
Well, first, I thought it was troubling that the Restaurant Act was not included in the Republican skinny COVID bill last week. It was bipartisan. It was not a partisan issue at all. And it would have been a grant program to restaurants. It would have provided a little extra to get them through. And I completely agree, Chris. With cold weather, several things are going to happen. One, it's not as comfortable to be outside. And two, people I don't think will feel, like going out. So you've got that phenomenon. So I do think there's a significant impact. We're trying to hopefully, if we get another shot at a big package, we'll get the restaurant bill in there. And the good news, it is bipartisan. I think at the state level, that's where some of these resources can be used. I know the program the governor set up used the money from the COVID relief fund. I think she has to make difficult judgments about where the money's going, but it's one of these issues that this is getting to be very critical, highly critical. And there might be ways that they could use some of that funds, either the one that's not expended or additional funds to help restaurants. Again, if we could have passed the HEROES Act and we could have given the state, a significant another increment of money, then these issues are a lot easier because you've got more money.
Right. Thank you.
Senator, I wanted to talk a little bit about our healthcare system. And, the pandemic has certainly put a glaring spotlight on just our country's healthcare system. We have more than 30 million Americans that still don't have health insurance and millions that are uninsured. Before the pandemic, medical bills was the number one cause for bankruptcy. At least that's been reported. So how do we fix America's healthcare system? There's been a call to Medicare for all. There's been a good amount of policies and proposals that have been introduced. Where do you stand in how we fix our country's healthcare?
Well, I think everyone has to have healthcare. I mean, and again, it's not just for the personal benefit. There's a societal, social benefit to it. Healthy children, better students, better workers later in their lives. It makes sense. And if you look at any major, at least Western country, they have a universal healthcare system, and their health results are much better than the United States. We spend more money than any place else, and we get worse results. What's shocking at the moment is instead of the administration thinking about how they can make the health system better, they're trying to take it apart. As you recall, President Trump was one of the head cheerleaders for the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and only for John McCain voting against him, one vote, it would have been repealed. Then when they couldn't repeal it directly, they went into the tax bill and they put in language that took out some of the provisions that the court used to justify its constitutionality. So now you have Republican attorney generals suing, and it's working its way up to the Supreme Court. In fact, frankly, I think if the court wanted to hear it, they could, but I think they decided it would be better after the election. They could declare it unconstitutional, and we would be right back to a system. In fact, we'd be worse off because the system we have would just be essentially taken apart. I think the way to go is to build on what we have now. We've got and I'm very, very pleased about the performance of the community health centers. They do a remarkable job. I think we should do things, for example, allow states to expand their Medicaid programs to a significant level. They could choose the income level, so they get more and more people into the healthcare system. I think we should pass legislation at the federal level that would allow people who are 50 or so to join Medicare. They could go in and pay a appropriate fee and be part of the Medicare system. There are lots of things we can do, but the goal is to have everyone covered by good healthcare plans, and plans that are not sort of a game of wits to figure out how do you get the benefits and are you going to be paid for seeing someone out of network or not, et cetera. I think we can do a better job.
To follow up on that, we have a question related to healthcare from Marcella Betancourt, who is the director of the Latino Policy Institute at Roger Williams University. She asked, one of the many reasons why we've seen a deeper impact of the virus within the Latino community, not just here in Rhode Island, but all over the country, is the fact that they are less likely to have access to adequate or affordable healthcare. As we see thousands of children going to school buildings, we should be concerned that many of them may not have access to health insurance. Would you support legislation to ensure that all minors, regardless of immigration status, have access to health coverage?
Absolutely. I think healthcare should be have access. Everyone should have access, but particularly children. And I must say, in Rhode Island, we have problems, but not as bad as some places. Well, as I said, we're up, I think, around 97% coverage for children. And that started a while ago, and that started with Senator John Chafee and the CHIP program, the Children's Health Insurance Program, who provided access to health care. But yes, we should all have, all the children should have access to health care. And interestingly enough, this is, again, not just a personal benefit, it's a social benefit. Because if a child is not well and goes to school and infects other children, guess what? It's more expensive, it's more problematic, it's more troublesome for the school. And having access to health care for children is just so tremendous. In terms of their ability to be better prepared to learn. So I think for the benefit of the country as well as individually, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And equality is important, whether it's race or whether it's gender. And this question from Shayna says, thank you, Senator Reed, for taking the time out of your day to deal with Chris and Travis. In our state's long history, there's been only one woman to represent us in U.S. Congress, that being Claudine Schneider in the 80s. Do you see this as a reflection of the state, the voters, or the voting trends of our state? And do you foresee a real opportunity for women in Rhode Island to contest the incumbents or this trend in the future?
Well, I think based upon the recent election, women did remarkably well, and no surprise, they're remarkably talented, and they did a superb job. I think when you go back and look, it's usually a combination of different factors. It's not one factor. It's not one predisposition or another. It's the issues at the moment, the individual candidates, the parties who they represent. I can remember, because I was around when Claudine Schneider was elected, is that there was a real problem in terms of the Democratic Party. And people just, she was able to capture the imagination of people and also come across as someone who was very astute, which she was, and very talented. And she did a remarkably good job. as a congresswoman. And then she ran, of course, she ran against Senator Pell, and the people of Rhode Island decided that Claiborne Pell's record of service and his creativity, the Pell Grants, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, he deserved another chance, and he got the chance. So it's not so much, I think, so gender specific. It's more or less what are the circumstances of that particular race. But what we see now is a remarkable group of women coming into the General Assembly. We have a remarkable woman governor. Frankly, 10, 15 years ago, if you, well, yes, there's going to be a woman governor, people would say, well, we have one. We've got a woman Secretary of State, Nellie Gobert. She's terrific. So what is happening is that the talent, the skill of women is being demonstrated, and people are understanding that, and they're responding to it. And I think it'll be more and more going forward.
I sure hope so. Thank you, Senator.
Our next question is about the Americorps program. And I wanted to highlight it because I served 1 year in Americorps, and I think this question definitely talks about the financial challenges. So this question is from Justin Mason Ross, and he states, Senator, you seem to have expressed your support for Americorps. As you may know, the stipend that is earned during service hours makes it difficult for low-income folks to serve. It's impossible to live on the stipend. Additionally, the Siegel Americorps Education Award that is earned after service is subjected to federal tax. What can you do to enhance the living conditions of Americorps members? Do you support excluding the Siegel Americorps Education Award from annual income?
Well, the legislation that I'm sponsoring right now takes care of the stipend issue by raising the stipend so it's a livable wage regardless of your family background. And we also eliminate the tax issue. So you would go off to school and you'd get your scholarship and you finish school and you'd be a great American. Americorps is a wonderful program. So what we're trying to do is make it front line and give it kind of the same give it a great deal of emphasis. We like to see this, I'd like to see this be one of the major options that young people consider as they leave high school. You know, I'm going to go to a civilian college, I'm going to go to Americorps, I'm going to do this, etc. But in specific response to your question, if my legislation passes, and I'm trying to get it passed, the stipend would be raised and the tax would be eliminated.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank not only Senator Reed for your time, but also to the audience out there with all these great questions. We wish we could get them to them all, but we have a limited time. So we are going to get to one more question. This is from Stefan Rodriguez. Stefan asks, Senator, how can we further leverage the R&D and federal contracts that you've gotten for Rhode Island to create sustainable jobs for millennials? Good question.
It's an excellent question. One thing that we want to do is make sure that the contractors here understand the great young people we have in Rhode Island in terms of their talent. And so we've been asking them to be very sensitive about recruiting locally, of going out and making contact. That's, I think, important. Then I think we want to work closely, and we are working closely with the contractors and the universities, because the universities are an excellent source of young people going into these businesses. In fact, when I go over to Newark, when I walk the aisles and we talk to young engineers, at least 3 out of 5 are URI graduate engineers. So that's a good story. So getting the businesses to look locally, getting them to work closely with the other institutions. I recall I brought down Brown University, URI, and everyone over to the Naval Station at Newport and had the director of DARPA come in, the Defense Advanced Research Project Administration. They do all the very sophisticated research for DoD. And we wanted them to get engaged, not just the companies, but the schools too, because we know we need these talented young people. The other thing we can do too is, in any R&D we bring in, is see that some of it gets to the universities and to the colleges, so that students participate, because the nature of university research is student participation. So those are some of the ideas we're working on. But the biggest thing is it's a simple math. The more R&D money that comes in, the more local companies are looking around for people to work and need workers. So the pressure's on. The less R&D money is that they can, they're satisfied. They got what they need. We don't want them satisfied. We want them looking.
Exactly. And I know that was a staple to our mission at Millennial RI, to, really what we called reduce the brain drain and have these young, talented folks in every generation to choose RI, to stay in the state. So programs like that will certainly help if they do the right thing, and we appreciate you doing that. So, Senator, at this point, what we're going to do is toss it to you. If you had anything that you wanted to add that you really weren't able to quite get to, you did get through a lot in an hour. I am quite impressed on that. That was very impressive. So we do appreciate it. But we just wanted to give you, a few minutes if you wanted to kind of have an open mic, and then we'll pass it over to Travis for any closing remarks.
And may I add one topic that we didn't get touched upon, but we talked about before the show, was housing and homelessness. So if you also add in a little bit of the work that you're doing there, that'd be great, because I'll get yelled at from the housing community.
No. I've been involved with housing issues throughout my career, both in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate. And we are on the verge, I think, of a major housing problem. These foreclosures and evictions that are being held off administratively will not be held off indefinitely. What we have to do is pass legislation like I was able to pass in 2010, called the Hardest Hit Fund, which gave resources to local housing agencies. And those housing agencies were able to help individual tenants and individual homeowners to avoid foreclosure. And we need to do that on a massive scale. If not, we're going to wake up not too long, unfortunately, and see these evictions becoming really significant, as well as foreclosures. So that's something we have to do. And then in addition, we've got to build more affordable housing. One of the programs I created was called the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And what we do is we take certain interest off of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Those are the big federal housing agencies, some of their profits. And we put it into a fund, and we distribute that fund throughout the United States to housing agencies, and they use it to build affordable housing. But we have to do much, much more of that, because we're hardly denting the housing need that we're seeing. So that issue of housing, Travis, thank you very, very much. It's absolutely critical, and it has to be discussed. Thank you. I'm just delighted with this. Was questions that were thoughtful, principled, dealing with the issues that are affecting us. As I said initially, we're in the midst of this multiple crises. In fact, I don't think I've seen anything like it, where you have a health crisis and an economic crisis and environmental crisis, and then you have you've always had, but now more prominent, the crisis of race and class, all of those coming forward. And we need solutions. We don't need, Frank, we don't need tweets. We need solutions. And we need a cooperative approach to these problems. We have to understand that we might have good ideas, but the other folks might have good ideas. And we have to sit down with them and talk to them and get things done. That's critical. But we really, I think, have to stop and say to ourselves, as my generation and a little younger, what are we leaving to the next generation? Are we leaving the same kind of economy and prosperity and security and commitment to social values that we benefited from? And I sometimes don't think so. I think we have to do better. I think we have to work on the issues that we talked about. Climate change, definitely. That's going to be an excruciatingly difficult issue as you move forward. We have to think about technology that displaces traditional jobs. with AI, with quantum computing, what will the workplace look like going forward? We have to think about those things right now. We also can't forget that we're living in a world where there are dangerous weapons. We have to be aware of them. We have to look for peaceful ways, and we have to do it, I think, as a collection of, we hope, democracies versus, we hope, some democracies, we hope. But we have to do it with international relations, not just with brute force. So we have to develop, I think, a much more sensitive and much more effective diplomacy around the globe. So we have a whole host of issues. What gives me confidence, what gives me a sense of hope are the millennials, are you. Listening to you, listening to your questions, listening to your concern about others, not just about yourself. How do I make an extra dollar? It's, how do we fix the environment? How do we go ahead and provide better opportunities for children? Listening to those questions gives me hope. And that, I think, will be the reason we prevail. It's because of you. So I want to just simply end by thanking you very, very much.
Thank you, Senator, again for taking your time. And it's been quite a year, and hopefully we'll get to a point in 2021 where we have Congress that's working. And no matter what happens, having your leadership in the state, I think Rhode Island is better for it. So thank you again for taking the time.
Okay.
And also, as we close out, I want to thank everyone that has either offered their questions, or will view this either on Facebook, Twitter, or some other streaming platform. Millennial Rhode Island, we intend to have these forums as educational and looking to bring issues to light from our elected officials to you. So you're better educated about what our elected officials are doing and what they stand for on top issues that impact us. So we hope that this forum did that for you, and bringing our senior senator Jack Reed to talk to y'all here today. So again, thank you for taking the time to view us. If you ever want to be engaged with Millennial Rhode Island, you can like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you can check us out on www.millennialri.com. But one note I'd like to end on in talking about what Jack Reed was mentioning, sort of the future of our country, the future of our state, with millennials and Generation and Gen Z. We've seen with the last primary election, a lot of millennials take the time to become campaign managers for successful candidates, and millennials too, taking their opportunity to run successfully on issues that impact them. So I think that is, for 6 years we've been building this network, and been kind of messaging like, hey, millennials are coming, they want to stay here in the state, they want to be part of, they want to see a government, they want to see an environment that works for their generation. We're definitely seeing that. So that is hope, and I would like to leave that with you all today. So have a great afternoon, and again, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully we'll see you at the next virtual event.